Scott, how are you?
Hey Dan, I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing great. It's great to see you. We're both back from vacation and we're excited about today's podcast.
Yeah, it's always nice to kind of do one just you and me and see where things end up as we fly by the seat of our pants here.
That's right, because we're going to try to show some slides to accompany this presentation. And we're going to endeavor, I'll say. Endeavor means like you're going to make a good faith effort to put our podcasts on our YouTube channel, the 403BY's YouTube channel. So, Scott, today's topic, it's actually two topics. We got a speak pipe message from one of our favorite educators that we interact with, Tara Slyman, a Pennsylvania speech language pathologist. And she asked that question we played at the beginning. She loved our interview with Ron, which was about his book, Paying for College. Ron Lieber is a New York Times columnist and the author of what I would say the best guide that I have seen for paying for college. But what Tara wants to know is, okay, lots of great information from that podcast, which was episode 173, which we ran last week. And she wants to know, how do you save for college? And how do you save for your child outside of college? I see you taking notes, Scott. This is good.
Yeah, I was just yeah, it occurred to me, I don't know why now, but not in our prep that you know we can actually be saving for our kids' retirement now, and in fact, we should, if you have the means and can, it might be a good idea. So we'll hit on that as well because
Yeah.
I think there's a really cool solution there.
All right, Scott, here's going to be our experimental part. We are going to try to show um, some graphics to accompany what we're talking about. And I think we should start off with what I would call the core saving for college plan. That is a 529 plan. Would you agree with that, Scott?
It's it is the most utilized um, college plan. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, well, let's go over some of the finer points. It's my understanding, Scott, this started in the late 80s, early 90s, I believe, or is that not so?
I thought it was like 1996. I think it was 1996. Don't hold
96.
me to that, but I think it was
Okay.
1996 because I don't think it
So the
was.
90s.
Yeah, I think the 90s. And it wasn't actually. I think it was tax deferred until 2001. You put the money in and it grows tax deferred. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's correct. And now it's tax free. So I'm jumping the gun.
What's
Sorry,
the difference?
you put
What?
together these fantastic slides, and I'm
Well,
just
thank
jumping the
you.
gun.
Well, what's the difference? Tax deferred and tax free? Because it sounds the same.
Yeah, so tax deferred. So you make a contribution, you do not get a deduction for it, but if there's growth in the account, um, when you go to pull that money out, you only pay taxes on the growth. So you actually do pay taxes on the money, but not the contributions. You don't put any taxes when the contributions come out, but you will pay ordinary income tax on the earnings if you as long as the withdrawals are qualified. So in that respect, it kind of works like a non-deductible IRA. You don't get a tax deduction, it grows tax deferred. It's also kind of like a variable annuity. And you can pull the money out for qualified expenses versus tax free, no deduction up front. But when you pull that money out for qualified expenses, you don't pay any ordinary income taxes at all. So obviously the tax free portion is kind of the big deal there. You would much prefer the tax free over the tax deferred.
So it's a better deal ultimately.
Yeah, having it tax free is a much better deal to you know to the people holding the account.
Well, I just have to tell the audience. So I create these like slideshows and things, and I make them super simple. And I've got like a few details, and then I show it to Scott, and he's like, "Okay, you got most of that right. There's always like more complexity." And we did talk about that, Scott, in our sort of pre-meeting here. one of our big frustrations is the complexity of all these plans. And maybe we'll touch on that a little bit later, but let's just go over several sort of popular plans, popular ways to save for college. And then we'll talk about our experience or maybe not having experience with each of these plans. All right, Scott. So the big one, the 529 plan. Wow. Why did they pick that number? I think it's because it's tax code. Is that why?
It's got to be. It's just like I don't. Yeah,
Like a
it just must have.
403B.
Yeah, it just must have been the tax code that was passed at the time. Now there are actually different types of 529 plans.
See, here he goes again, right? I can't even stop him, right? I try to keep him, like, reel him in, and then he just gets into the complexity. But the truth is, it's accurate what he says. So anyway, Scott, 529 plans. I don't know about why they picked this number, but I do think it has to do with the tax code. Anyway, these plans are administered by each state. So we're in California. California has a state-based plan. When we lived in Maryland, there was a Maryland-based plan. And you can contribute to any state's plan, right, Scott? Just because you're in California doesn't mean you can't contribute to, say, the Maryland plan or the Iowa plan.
Yeah, you can contribute to whatever plan fits your needs the best. So whatever the the lowest cost option is, if that works for you, then great. I'm not a fan of the way 529 plans are structured. I think it's dumb that every state has their own 529 plan. I think it's just stupid. Why? I mean, like, you have the Coverdell. Oh, we're gonna get to that. You have other accounts. Why can't it just be like an IRA? Like, okay, Vanguard offers one, Schwab offers one, XYZ company offers one.
I'm
Instead,
with you.
we're stuck with these state-based plans. And here's an interesting fact that you probably could care less that I'm just making this podcast longer than it needs to be. The fees that are generated by 529 plans are not required to be used to reduce the costs of 529s or even to provide for education. So extra fees could technically be used by states for things that are completely unrelated to education.
Sigh.
It's just dumb that they're administered by the state, but they are administered by the states, and we'll get to in a bit. That means there could be a tax deduction involved on your state return. So even though you can use any state that you want, it might not be a good idea to do so.
Okay, well, a little preview there. And I've got to add that bullet point. Scott thinks these are dumb. That would be like our last bullet point, maybe. All right. Administered by each state. Scott, the contribution limits are enormous. They range from $235,000 to, wait for it, $529,000. And I'm just noticing, Scott, in my PowerPoint, actually Google slide, I left a zero off on the 529,000. So
I
for
didn't even
those
see it. You're
watching on, I deducted the zero, Scott. For those watching on YouTube, there is a zero missing. So I've got the pointer. It should go right there. Yikes. That is a lot of money, Scott. Unbelievable amount of money. But I bet there's people that put this much in.
Yeah, I think there are.
We're not those people.
We're not. And these limits are not actually contribution limits. They're aggregate account limits. So once your aggregated accounts reach this balance, it depends on the state. Again, this is dumb. Depends on the state. So 235 to 529, whichever state you're in. Once it exceeds that, you can no longer
Scott,
have.
I keep going. I'm gonna update this slide here, Scott. So hang on. All right, Scott. I am going to do some real-time editing because I just don't want these two errors on our slide. So let me go ahead and do a quick fix here, Scott. I'm putting the zero in, and I'm going to add Scott thinks these plans.
I said the structure is dumb.
Structure is dumb. Well, I'm not going to fix that part. So anyway, all right, Scott, back to this plan here. So tax free. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, we were talking about the aggregate limits, and so there's aggregate limits.
Explain what that means.
That's how much. So once your balance actually reaches that amount, you can no longer put money in. So it's not like if you made 235, it's not like you can always have $235,000 worth of contributions, up to 529,000. it depends on what your balance is. Once it exceeds that amount, then you can no longer make contributions to it. The other thing that people might want to know is that you do have gift tax issues. So anybody can give anybody $15,000 a year. So like I could gift to you or to let's say Ben $15,000 to his 529 plan, and I don't have to file a gift tax return. If I gift him $15,010, I have to actually file a little a thing on my tax return that go for $10, the portion that exceeded 15,000. And most people don't want to do that. Now you can give away something like 10 or $12 million throughout your life, some ridiculous amount of money. I don't remember off the top of my head. So that $10 just goes against that huge amount that I can gift to people. So there's no taxes owed, but most people don't want to file that form. But you can gift up to $15,000 without having to file that form. If you gift more than that, it's not going to cost you money. But with the 529, they have a special provision. I'm sure most people are listening are not going to take advantage of this, but it actually allows you to make 5 years worth of contributions in 1 year. So 15,000 times 5, that's $75,000 per person without having to file a gift tax return. Essentially just averages those 5 years and you don't have to file a gift tax return. So I know most teachers make, probably what, 250 a year, 250,000 a year, most teachers, most educators. So like they're probably all like trying to like figure out how they can get all that money into this plan. Well, they have that as an option. I joke, only out of cynicism, but it is available if people are looking for it. Maybe you have, grandparents who have saved a lot of money and they're looking to get money into the 529 plan. That's where we see this a lot. That's one way they can do it. So, two grandparents who want to put a ton of money in, you put $150,000 into one kid's plan in 1 year.
And Scott, as far as these limits, the 235,000 to 529,000, you'll just have to check with the state that you're in and that the
Yeah.
agency that administers your plan.
Yeah.
I don't even know what California's is because these are numbers that I couldn't get to. So Scott, let's just say, if my count grows to, let's say I'm in a state where the max is 235, as soon as it hits that number, you can't put any more money in. It's not like they're going to penalize you if it's grown to 250. It's just no more contributions. And I guess conversely, if it drops, then you could put more money in, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, you could. As long as it doesn't exceed, as long as your contributions don't exceed that amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Scott. So you can have unlimited number of plans. You could have one in Maryland. You can have one in California, one in Iowa. Go ahead. I see you. There's something. You have found something.
I just looked it up. California is the $529,000 limit. We're the 529. It's us.
It's so funny. Well, it kind of probably makes sense given the cost of living here. I would say, other states have high cost cities, whereas California, because of NIMBYs, we have very high cost housing here. We have a huge audience. It's become one of my latest pet peeves because it's affecting my town of Redlands, of generally older individuals who are against all new density, any density. They fight tooth and nail. And I think that's one of the reasons California has such high cost of housing. Anyway, all right, Scott. So you can have unlimited number of plans. The custodian, so like I opened the accounts for both my son and my daughter. I control the money. And with these plans, you can invest in mutual funds. Target date funds are popular. And in fact, that's how I first learned about the concept for target date funds. At the end, we'll talk about our individual experiences with these plans. But I learned about target date funds because of our daughter's 529 plans. I've already said that Scott thinks these plans are dumb. Any other thoughts on this before I go to the next slide, Scott?
So you can invest in mutual funds, but be careful. These are generally not your typical mutual funds. Sometimes they might have the same name, but they're a slightly different version. They can be very expensive. you don't get to choose which mutual funds. These are not. It's not like a brokerage account where you can choose which mutual funds that you can invest in. It's pre-selected by the state.
Mhm.
That's why I think the structure's dumb, Dan. I think it's dumb that you don't get to make these decisions. That we have 50 states with 50 plans, and some states have multiple plans. That some of them are actually commission based. They'll offer a non-commission based one and a commission based one, so you could be paying upfront. It's crazy. I just think the structure is dumb. I don't love 529 plans, but I'm agnostic as to whether or not they should exist, I guess. But the structure is dumb. They could be a lot easy. They could be done in a lot easier manner.
Scott, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is at design, these were supposed to be run by states, only available directly through the state plans. And then the financial service industry was infuriated because they wanted to get their hands on this money. And today, most of these plans are sold by brokers, which cost parents a lot more.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if that was the original intention, but that's how it's turned out to be. I mean, I was actually in college when these plans started, and yeah, they really started out a lot. They started out very to be pushed by brokerage firms and big brokers and just lots of fees. I mean, I just don't. I don't know. I don't think. I think we should revamp 529 plans. That's my opinion. I'll
Yeah.
just full
Should I
stop.
change the slide or no? That was a hassle last time. I made a whole mess of it.
Let's not do that.
Okay. All right. These are new provisions. I think it's insane, but starting in 2017, up to 10K for K-12 tuition at private or religious schools could be deducted and used for that purpose.
Can be qualify as a qualified education expense.
Yeah, there you
Yeah,
go.
and I don't think this is. I think this is just a giveaway, honestly, to mm,
Special interests.
upper income probably.
Yeah.
I'm not taking a swipe at people who send their kids to private school or religious schools. I don't see any real benefit to. Okay, so you have a child, you put a bunch of money in the account, and it grows till they're 7 years old. At which point you start taking it out to pay for elementary school. I mean, you don't. There's not enough time for that money to compound. You have 7 years, and if you have 7 years, you don't really have enough time to be aggressive with that.
Mm-hmm.
So all you're doing is you're getting a little bit of tax-free growth. I mean, if interest rates were high, maybe more, but you're getting a little bit of tax-free growth. The big reason, one of the big issues I have with this is what this does is it really benefits states that have people who are in states that have a state deduction. Because
Yeah.
now you can get a partial state deduction for private school.
Yeah.
So it depends on the state, but now you put money in. You can literally put it in today, make your qualified withdrawal tomorrow, and you get a state tax deduction. Well, I mean, so what's the point of this really, other than to provide, upper middle income and higher income people an extra tax deduction? If you send your kids to private school, I don't care. That's fine. Not a big deal. I'm not attacking that. But like, what is this for? What is this provision for? It doesn't help anybody who actually needs help. So I'm not a fan of it, but you can do it. You can put up to 10K for K-12 tuition at private religious schools. Anyway, so that's one thing that you can do.
Yeah, Scott too, and I'm not taking a swipe either because I primarily taught at public schools, and my children primarily attended public schools. There were a few times where they attended private schools for a few years, and I actually taught at a private school for a couple years. And I could only wish that every public school teacher had the kind of work environment that I had at the private school, Scott. I had class size never bigger than 20, and I got over an hour of planning time every single day, something I never had when I taught
Yeah.
elementary school. In California, Scott, I had 34 fourth and fifth graders in my class. Anyway, okay, the other recent change in 2019, registered apprentice programs. So distributions can be used for registered apprentice programs. I actually think that's pretty good.
I love this provision. This is a good provision. You
Should
know,
I change it to say Scott loves this?
this is this is one good thing I like. Again, I don't hate 529 plans, but I just think they could be
Yeah, better.
better. Yeah, no, I think this is a great. This is absolutely great because not everybody goes to college, and you
Yeah.
don't know when you have a child whether or not that child's gonna want to go to college, or maybe they're going to get such large scholarships that they're not going to need the 529 plan. Whatever, it's really nice that they're making this available to a greater population than just people who are college bound.
And you raise a good point there. What happens if there's money left over or your child doesn't go to college? Correct me if I'm wrong here, Scott. You can move that money to another child, or you could use it for yourself if you go to school. If you do decide to take it out, I mean, you can get your hands on it. There's just going to be some penalties, correct?
Yes. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You can use that money for yourself, for another child, so you can change the beneficiary to another qualified beneficiary. Usually, that's going to be a sibling, but it could be a parent, a grandparent, a niece, a
Mm.
nephew. I Oh, don't quote me on this. I thought it could be a cousin, but that might not be correct.
Second cousin, third cousin, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I'm not right on that. I'm gonna look it up before we go, but
Well, I won't quote you. It's a good thing we're not recording this, so I wouldn't sweat it, Scott. Okay, two more points here. It's considered a parental asset for financial aid purposes. Um, and you wanted to add something, Scott?
not yet.
Okay. And then we'll go through our experiences real quick. I have a 529 plan for each of my children. My daughter, Lily, she's now 23. We started the 529 for her when she was, I believe, 1 years old. It was in California. And we moved to Maryland when she was 3, and we decided to keep it in California. So I continued to make contributions for her when she was in California. And then when our son Ben was born, I started a 529 for Ben in Maryland. And one of the great features of the Maryland plan, one, it's administered by a very low cost company, T. Rowe Price, Baltimore based company. It In that state, you could get deductions for your contributions. And so I seriously considered creating a new one for Lily, but then we knew we would be moving. And so I didn't go through that paperwork to do that. But we still, even though we moved to New Mexico at the time when we moved there in 2005 had an atrocious 529 plan. It was a very high cost financial company oversaw it. So we continued to contribute to the California 529 plan for Lily, and then the similar Maryland plan for Ben. And as I alluded to earlier, this is where I heard about the target date fund concept. They asked me in California, um, when will our daughter turn 18? And so they put us in a plan that became safer and less aggressive the closer she got to what would be her freshman year. And that was just like almost a light bulb moment for me, Scott. It was like, wow, that is so logical. And that makes perfect sense for saving for retirement.
Yeah. Um, yeah, absolutely. And I did something very similar, but I'll take a step back. I'm going to answer that question from before, and then I'll tell you
Okay.
how I did it. But so it can be a first cousin and even their spouse.
Oh my gosh.
So it could be a spouse, son, daughter, stepchild, foster child, adopted child, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, siblings, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, father-in-law, mother-in-law, father, mother, or ancestor of either aunt, uncle, or their spouse, niece, nephew, or their spouse, first cousin, or their spouse. So it's pretty broad on who that money can be given to. And I actually have a client where they actually did one of those transfers, and it ended up being really cool. Their child didn't go, or they didn't use the funds for whatever reason, and they actually moved it to I believe it was a cousin. That's why I stumbled there at the beginning, but we people ask again, like, what do I do? I'm a financial planner, so where do I put my money? Honestly, I haven't put a ton of thought into this, which is kind of ridiculous considering this is what I do for a living. And I actually have a son in college right now and a daughter who's 13. Um, I opened a 529 account for both of them, and we have money in 529 accounts. But I'm probably funding. I will be funding their money, their colleges from both my own savings, some of their money, and then, believe it or not, college loans. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But there was something else I think we were gonna. Yeah, we'll get back to. Okay, yeah. So as I stumble over my words here, the other thing that's going to help fund my kids' college is we're taking the loans that we'll get from the federal government. So these Stafford loans, they're not subsidized, they're unsubsidized, but I'm actually having my son take them every single year, even though I actually can afford to pay. We're taking them because he is likely going to become a teacher, a public school
Mm.
teacher. My daughter, even though she's only 13, says she's going to be an elementary school teacher. That might change. Who knows? But I fully plan on her taking those loans because of the public student loan forgiveness program. We're going to use that program to help pay for a portion of those expenses. Um, so I just introduced a whole nother level of complexity into this that I probably shouldn't have done. But we are talking about how we're saving for our own kids. And obviously, we'll get to in a little bit how we save for our kids for non-college expenses. But for college, I'm basically just in a 529. We don't have no deduction for it, but basically a 529.
No, Scott, I think that bringing up that forgiveness program, I think that's sort of a hack. I would bet that a lot of our audience are teachers, and I think it goes two ways. They have kids who are like, "No way, I'm going to be a teacher," after seeing how hard the job is. But maybe there are kids like yours who say, "No, I want to go into this," and that's what we want, actually.
Absolutely. And if they know they have these as an option, I think that would be, the PSLF as an option. I think it's great. There are some issues with 529 plans that we'll get to, but they're fine. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not the end of the world if you start putting money, $50 a month into a 529 plan, and for whatever reason you won't use it, because your kid either went to college, didn't go to college, or because they got so much in scholarship that they couldn't use it. Um,
So, Scott, we would tell our audience, first start with your own state plan, see who administers it, see what the financial company is. If it's a Vanguard, a Fidelity, a T. Rowe Price, a TIA, chances are it's probably got a good cost basis. Next, see, do you get a state deduction? And again, I think it's a limited number of states that do that. But if you are in a state like, again, I haven't looked at New Mexico's in a while, but I thought it was too expensive. Look at different states. Iowa's plan is constantly rated as one of the highest. I know it's administered by Vanguard. I can speak very highly about the Maryland plan because it's T. Rowe Price. California's has changed. So when we started, it was TIAA, then it moved to Fidelity, and now it's back to TIAA. So the cost is fine, but I will tell you it's lower cost in the Maryland plan. And since I don't get a state deduction, I would probably not start it with California if I was to do it again.
yeah, I mean, I literally started with California because it was just easier for me
Mhm.
at the time. I didn't want to research 100 different, 50 different,
Mhm.
no, 100 different plans. I just didn't want to do it, and I knew it was just fine. Fine. One thing I would say though, if you're in an expensive plan and you want to move it to another plan, I think this is a good idea. You can do that. It's actually called a rollover. But if you received a state deduction,
Mm.
be careful,
Mm.
because if you move it from the state where you received a state deduction to another state, that money might get clawed back, meaning you might have to claim that as essentially as income for the year that you did that. So look into clawback provisions for rollovers if your money is in a state plan that's too expensive and you want to move it somewhere else. You may need to stay in that sort of more expensive state plan. Also, some of the more expensive state plans, sometimes they've actually created two different plans, one that's expensive and one that's less expensive. So you could do a rollover to the less expensive option. So if you were sold a broker sold plan, you might be able to move that to a non broker sold plan in your state and maintain that tax deduction. Did we make this complicated enough for you, Dan?
Well, Scott, I think we do a podcast on what I'm about to say at another time, but we discussed this off air. It is insane how complex everything is in this country, whether it's paying for healthcare, saving for retirement, saving for college. It is bonkers. We do not do it well. Our country is not exceptional in the positive sense when it comes to these things. But Scott, let's move on because we could rant on that for a while. All right, there's another flavor of 529 plans, and these are prepaid plans, but they're getting less and less popular. In fact, there's only 9 states that offer these as of this recording: Florida, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Mississippi, Nevada, or Nevada, depending how you pronounce it. I think there was a whole West Wing episode on that. Pennsylvania, Texas, and Washington. And what these do is they lock in tuition at today's costs at a state school. So you can actually prepay for tuition for 4 years at a state university in the state that you start this plan. Anything you want to say about those items, Scott?
It's Nevada.
Is that how you pronounce it? I was just in case other people pronounce it a different way. So
No, you're right. I was just joking. It's a Veep episode.
yeah. Oh, it's Veep. I think
It's
it's also. Well, you're probably right.
It could be West Wing. I didn't know. I'm rewatching West Wing right now. So, but yeah, it's a
Yeah.
Veep episode. It's Nevada or Nevada. It's hilarious. You went through that whole slide and did a great job. And the entire time
I read the bullet points well. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, I was trying to think of whether it was Nevada or Nevada. So, my parents live in Nevada.
Mine live in Nevada. They don't. They live in New Mexico. Or is it New Mexico? I don't know.
There's a New Mexico.
Exactly. That's one of my favorite Simpsons lines. That's Homer.
I think prepaid plans can be right in the right circumstance, but it's tough to figure. You know, they're inflexible because you have to use it at a qualified state institution in your state. And what if you move? What if your kid doesn't want to go there? All these things. Because of the inflexibility, I'm not really a fan. I do like the idea that you can kind of lock in costs now, but I mean, the entire fact that that's a issue is just so problematic in the first place. I don't love these, but don't completely exclude them from your research.
Sure.
That's where I would leave this one.
Well, let's just go over a couple more points and we'll talk about if we had any experience with these. You can make a lump sum contribution. And I'll talk about something I considered back when Ben was born. You must participate for at least 3 years. So, you know, if your kid's like 17 or 18, unless they want to delay school for 3 years, I imagine, can't just drop in and pay that. And I wonder, and I don't know this, Scott, I don't know this answer, but I wonder if it varies by age, the cost. You know, the younger the kid, is it cheaper, the prepaid tuition? I just don't know that.
I have not done my homework on prepaid 529 plans in like the last couple of years. In prior homework, I just didn't love them. I just felt they were so inflexible, and it was too much of a commitment to something that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to use. So I just don't use them. And also, I don't have too many clients in those states, so it hasn't been something to evaluate for me. So I just want to make sure that I'm not saying you shouldn't use it, but you should really, really do your research on this.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll tell you what, we almost did one. Most allow use outside of state. So if you move from one state to another or want your child to go to a different state school, I think there's money that can be made available, but I think it gets complex. And that's to your point, Scott. I think that's probably why these are becoming less and less popular. when I look at the states that still offer this, I'm going to make a wild generalization. So that's a warning to the audience. But I feel like people who live in Texas, they just love the University of Texas. It's a great school. I get that. I wonder with some of these schools like Florida, like Maryland, the University of Maryland, there's great love for that university. I wonder if one of the reasons these plans are still in existence is a lot of people can see not moving and their child going to one of the state schools. So maybe in these states all seem to have pretty popular state schools. Maybe that's the reason.
I guess. I mean, it does kind of, what we are seeing, slightly off topic, but it is related. Um, some states offering free college education, but it requires them. There's certain requirements that if you leave the state after a certain amount of time or things like that, you have these sort of drawbacks there. So I think for the right individuals, you're right.
Yeah.
It could really save them some money and make sense. But it kind of requires you to know something about the future that's hard to know.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it gets difficult. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it could be, and maybe it's the state's own inherent narcissism that
Ooh,
drives these plans.
I was gonna say culture, but you went a little more negative.
Well, no, in a good way. I mean, I think it's like nationalism at a state level. Like, hey, we love our schools here, and we think everybody should go to them. It's a good narcissism, not a bad narcissism. Um, again,
It's pride. Maybe it's pride.
there we go. It's a good pride.
Scott, I'm probably going to butcher this when I go back and listen, but I think you maybe suggested a good new name for our podcast. Slightly off topic, but it is related. I think that might be a more accurate title for our podcast, Scott.
I don't have ADD, but sometimes when I do a podcast, I feel like I do.
I definitely have ADD. My friends call me attention deficit Dan. Okay, Scott, almost done here. Contributions are deductible in some states. That was true in Maryland. And I briefly considered doing this actually for both Lily and Ben. When we moved to Maryland, I looked at their plan. I believe for some reason this number is in my head, but Lily was 3 years old. This was 2002. She would have been four. She was 4 years old. And to do the in state tuition for Maryland was $23,000 at the time. And we had just sold our house in California. So I had some money in the bank. I could have paid that amount. And Scott, I seriously considered it because that seemed reasonable to me. Um, and I don't know what Maryland costs for in state. But Scott, I'm pretty sure, and again, I feel bad even saying this. I think this just covers tuition, right, Scott? This isn't room and board, right?
Well, I think you can use if you have excess money. Gosh, you're right, Dan. I apologize to our listeners. I wasn't prepared for that question. I believe you can use some of that money for, non-tuition purposes if you have extra. But it kind of doesn't make sense, really, because I mean, you're only funding enough to fund for the tuition portion.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what if the kid gets scholarships, things like that? I think then you might have the ability to use that money for tuition expenses. But yeah, I'm sorry, man. I didn't do my homework on
That's
that.
okay. And we're not the experts on this. This is basically, our experience on this. All right, Scott, just a couple more. The UTMA. Again, I love these names, which means I actually don't. Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, aka Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. Scott, if that is not the most compelling name and acronym out there, I don't know what is.
Yes, UTMA, UGMA accounts. These used to be the primary vehicles where people saved for college. And they're really just kind of like a brokerage account or a mutual fund account where you put money in, you don't get any real special tax benefits, but the account's actually owned by the child. So, it can be taxed at their tax rate. So there's some advantage there. But the money is owned by the child. So when they turn of age, that money is technically theirs. If they can show a driver's license or some proof of ID that it depends on the state, the age, but like 18 years old, it's their money. They can do with it whatever they want. And it also counts against the bullet point here, but it counts as an asset of the child for financial aid purposes. So it can hurt, um, financial aid that the child could be receiving.
And Scott, does it have to be used for college, or can it be used for
No, it
anything?
can be used for anything, absolutely anything. But parents, this is rarely happens, but parents do have to be careful with this money. It has to be used in the best interest of that child.
Mm.
If it's not used, if you let's say you got, I don't know, $25,000 in a UTMA account in that child's name, and you decide to use that money to I don't know, buy yourself a boat, the child could technically sue you for that. Believe it or not.
But if you name the boat after your child,
maybe, you know, that will make up for the fact that they didn't get a year of college paid for or whatever. But yeah,
Scott, is there no tax deduction for these plans?
there's no tax deduction for these plans. No.
But it grows tax free.
Nope.
So there's nothing. There's no.
It can grow tax free. I mean, it's going to depend on the tax bracket of the parents, and Dan Heron is going to kill me for not knowing the answer to this. It's okay. Up to $1,050 in earnings is tax free. The next $1,050 is taxable at the child's rates. Any earnings over $2,100 are taxed at the parents' rates. Okay, there we go. Dan Heron doesn't have to kill me now. So there is some tax benefit to these plans.
Is that total or is that per year?
This would be during the year. So
okay,
up to $1,000 in earnings, $1,050 in earnings, tax free. The next $1,050 is taxable to child's tax rates, and any earnings over $2,100 are taxed at the parent's rate. And that's for children under 19 or age 24 for full-time students whose unearned income does not provide half of their support. Are we making this any easier yet for you, Dan?
You are. Which Dan are you talking to?
Oh, that's right, Dan Heron. To you, Dan. It's like
no. It just this is probably why I didn't open one, just because of this kind of complexity. I think you mentioned this. These plans predate the 529 plan, and I think probably, tell me if I'm right here, Scott, there was no formal saving for college plan, and people looked at like different things available, and this one probably is what made sense. So they kind of like square pegged it, would you say?
Well, I mean, in some respects, it's kind of a nice program because you don't have, I mean, other than the fact that it's included as a student asset, that's the biggest drawback. But you can invest in whatever you want. Which
That's
you
right.
can't
That's one of
with
our
the
bullet
529.
points. You can do real estate and fine art.
And probably even like, yeah, I won't even get into it. But yeah, you can put your money into, you can buy ETFs. You can basically buy, open account, buy ETFs at no cost.
Big flexibility.
You have a lot of flexibility there, and some tax benefit as well. So that flexibility, I think, actually, in some cases, could be better than the 529. But the problem is the fact that it's, the biggest issue is it's in the kid's name. Now, if you're not going to get any benefit anyway, so if your FAFSA shows assets and income that you're not going to receive any aid anyways, I guess this isn't that big of a deal, and it can be a really good account to save money. And except for the fact that the kid gets access to the money once they turn, the age. It depends on the state. It's either 18 or 21.
Again,
that money is theirs. They can do with it whatever they want. That's the biggest drawback.
Well, I think what I'm going to do, if I'm lucky enough to have a grandchild, I'm going to scour the art world for the next up and coming artist, and I'm going to buy a piece of work, and I'm going to put it in the UTMA for my grandchild, and I'm just going to gamble. I'm not going to be around to see what happens, but maybe it'll be the next Monet.
I think we should open them up and fund them with NFTs.
Non-fungible tokens, Scott. Man, how about Dan, the first tweet Scott Downhauer ever sent?
There you go. We'll turn that into a non-fungible token and put it into a UTMA account. There we go.
All right. My only experiences, Scott, when I was teaching fifth grade and my students were lining up to go outside for recess, one of the kids said to me, we had just gotten done talking about investing, and he's like, "Oh, Mr. Otter, do you have a UTMA account?" And I'm like, and then I think I had some vague notion of this very thing. And I'm like, no, I think maybe Lily hadn't even been born yet or something. And I go, or I don't even, maybe I didn't even know what the thing was. I'm like, no, what's that? And he said, under the mattress. Do
Under
you recommend that, Scott, for a saving strategy under the mattress?
Honestly, Dan, with interest rates essentially at zero, what's the difference?
Yeah.
I mean, and
A lumpy sleep. You get, poor sleep.
spread it out, diversify.
Diversify. Yeah. Don't think about like Breaking Bad, all those shots of like all the money they had in the storage unit. You'd be sleeping on a very high bed. Um, okay, Scott.
Wow, I don't know why anybody listens to us.
I don't know if anybody is, which is the correct grammar there. All right,
Does
the Coverdell ESA, Education Saving Account, used to be known as the Education IRA. You can do up to $2,000 a year. Contributions are non-deductible. Contributions can only be made when the child is under age 18. So Ben is 17. We can contribute throughout this year until he turns 18. Tax-free earnings, tax-free withdrawals. You can invest in stocks and mutual funds. Anything you want to say about that, Scott?
Yeah, these are kind of shunned by Wall Street. I mean, a lot of, or actually just a lot of mutual fund companies. It's really actually hard to open a Coverdell education savings account. Not everybody offers them. I think you can get them like Schwab, TD, TIA. I don't know if Vanguard even offers one,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. Um, it's it's not a bad account. It has the same benefits as the UTMA, meaning you can invest in whatever you want, and well, not whatever, but for the most part, you can invest in any mutual funds or stocks or exchange traded funds. So I mean, it's very flexible in that way, and the earnings grow tax free, as long as you make qualified withdrawals. So it's kind of a good account, and the reason you don't really hear about it very much is because most personal finance blogs are geared towards the wealthy, where a $2,000 contribution is looked at with, um, like, oh, you can only contribute $2,000 a year. That's it. Well, think about it. $2,000 a year is, what is that? $166, almost $167 a month. That's not an insignificant amount of money to a large percentage of Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And how many people do you know are actually contributing $166 a month to any type of college education plan? One, it's tough. We're trying to get people to contribute $50 to a 403b. So like $167 might be way more than most people could even think about contributing. But it is, so it's, I actually think for a large number of people, it's a nice account. Here's the downside. You do have to choose your investment options, and you're not going to get any help with that. Where the 529,
Good point.
you've got that target date option that you can do. I mean, you could put a target date fund in the Coverdell, but you have to kind of know about it to do that. 529 just kind of makes the process easier. That's one thing I like about the structure. Coverdell gives you a little more flexibility, a lot more flexibility, but you kind of have to know what you're doing. So I'm not against this account, and it's, I bet you the vast majority of people are saving less than $2,000 a year for college education, because the vast majority of people are saving zero.
Now, I think that's such an excellent point. And I think we have a couple more bullet points here. Speaking of points, unused money must be distributed to child by age 30, and it's considered a parental asset for financial aid purposes. So, Tara's question was, how can you save for your child beyond just college? Would this be a good thing, maybe, Scott? Does it have to be used for education purposes? Could someone save this, and then at 30, the kid has whatever the have 2,000 times how many years they contributed plus any earnings.
Yeah, the downside is it does need to be used for qualified education expenses, and if it's not, then the
Okay.
money comes out with the earnings come out as ordinary income plus a 10% tax penalty. So it really does need to be used for qualified education expenses, but it does have similar uh, transferability. So you can move it to another beneficiary, a spouse, another child, brother, sister, father, mother, aunt, uncle. Same thing, same things for the 529, even a first cousin. So there's a little flexibility there. One thing that most people don't know is that there are income limitations. So if you make too much money, you can't actually contribute.
Mm.
However, it's easy to get around that because the person who is like the custodian of the account, the person who's like watching over it, the responsible party, doesn't have to be the one making the contribution. So it's the person who's making the contribution has to qualify. Most kids don't have incomes of, unless I guess they're TikTok or YouTube stars, don't have $110,000 a year of income, or married $220,000 of adjusted gross income. So they can make the contribution, or you can gift the money to your child and they can make the contribution. It's really easy to get around that, but there are AGI income limitations for this. So again, we're just getting into this, like there's all these different type of accounts that have all these different little things that you're supposed to know about them. It just gets to be so overwhelming that most people do nothing.
Yeah.
Most people do nothing because of that.
Paralysis. Yeah.
So, like, my advice is to first do something, make it easy. Just open an online FDIC insured savings account in your own name. Start putting money into that. Make it automatic out of your checking account. Then take a step back, breathe, then do your research and figure out what's best
Mm.
for you. And you can always move that money into those accounts if you need to.
And again, it's maybe you're not getting any tax advantages at that point, but as to your point, Scott, is so much better than doing nothing. Money is beginning to grow, and maybe you end up just leaving it there, and maybe it costs you some amount of money, um, but you have at least set aside funds. That's I think what you're saying.
Yeah, you've started the habit, and you're going to get statements. You're going to see that money. It's not going to grow very much, but at least you started. You're not done
Good
yet,
point.
but at least you started. If 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 you're the type of person, which most people are, when you look at all these options that you have, most people are going to look at all these, having to figure out all the different, which one is applicable to me. They're just not going to do anything.
I agree.
So just do something first. You're not done, but just do something first and get it started. Then do something better.
Oh, I like that. Do something first, then do something better. Wow, that's kind of catchy there, Scott. You're thinking of all kinds of things today. Just real quick, I actually started one of these plans for Lily. In some ways, I think I kind of used the philosophy that you just espoused there. I wasn't really sure what to do, but I had read about these plans. I had a long time brokerage account with Schwab. I credit Schwab for getting me into investing because it was so easy. They really were, especially at that time, which was 1995, 96, I think, when I opened my first account. They were really, really receptive for working with, the uninformed, the young. And they had lots of offices. So I was able to go into an office, talk to a person that wasn't a salesperson. And so think I contributed a total, Scott, of $500 in Lily's name. And I just checked yesterday and actually called Schwab because I forgot whose name it was even in. And it had grown to $4,000, and I only put $500 in. So think about that, man. If I had
Wow.
put in with a few more zeros, which of course I did not have that kind of money then. So, I've got this
That's
money now.
amazing. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my experience with that. So Scott, just to close the book on this, I think you just said it best. Do something. It can be as simple as starting a brokerage account. I know a lot of what's it called? Credit unions have things like holiday funds. I remember when I was teaching, I would put like $100 a month into a holiday fund. you could probably set up another account just for this purpose. And then when you have a chance to research it, or maybe you move to a state like Maryland where it's tax deductible, then you do the 529. I don't know, but I think your message to do something now, the earlier the better, is a real wise one.
Yeah, and so ally.com, ALLY.com, online savings account, it pays a whopping 0.5%. Yay. But it does allow you to actually create like little sub accounts.
Mm,
So you can put your savings there, but you can also create little sub accounts within that and name them.
I
So
like
you
it.
could have your primary savings and you can have your education savings and fund that separately from your emergency savings. That's where I put my emergency savings account, and my property tax money is
Mm,
in that account. And I have different sub accounts. I have my property tax sub account. I have my
nice.
home maintenance sub account. And again, I'm not saying that's where your long term education money should be, but that is one option, just to get started. But yeah, but Tara asked not just about college, she
Yeah.
asked about other savings as well.
Okay. I'm going to stop the share there because I don't have accompanying slides for that. So
We
I'm
didn't
very
actually,
curious what you think.
well, we didn't actually talk about funding college with Roth IRAs. And I think that's a viable option, although it does get a little complex. Um, but so for those who don't know, Roth IRA is where you could put money into your own account if you have taxable income. If you have W-2 income, you can put money into the account up to uh, what are the contribution limits, Dan? 5,500 if you're under age
Yes.
50, 6,500 if you're over age 50.
Yep.
That money will grow tax free until it has been in the account for at least 5 years and you've reached 59 and a half. At which point you can take the money out completely tax free, both the contributions and the earnings. Now, if you take the earnings out prior to that, they are subject to taxation and may be subject to a 10% penalty, but there is an exception for qualified education expenses. You have something to add, Dan?
Well, I was going to say it's actually 6,000 in regular
Oh,
contribution. Yeah.
gosh. That's right. Okay, 6,000 regular contributions. So sorry about that. You'd think I would know. Is what I do for a living. Um, but so the nice thing about Roth IRAs, which I mean, really cool thing, is that every dollar you put into a Roth IRA is actually a dollar you can take out tomorrow. Contributions come out before earnings. So that means any money you put into that account, you can actually take out and use for whatever purpose you want, as long as you don't exceed the amount of money you contributed. You won't have to pay any taxes. The earnings have to stay in there. Earnings got to stay in there for at least 5 years and until you're age 59 and a half, whichever comes later, before they're tax free. But most people don't know that they can actually use the contributions, and you can use those contributions to pay for college expenses because there's no consequent negative tax consequences for taking that money out. Also, you can use the earnings in your Roth IRA to pay for qualified education expenses. They just won't be penalty free. The earnings are subject to income taxes, but they are not subject to that 10% penalty. And in California, another 2.5%. So 529s Roth IRAs can be a viable alternative. And if the nice thing about it is if your kid decides not to go to college, that money's not in their name, it's in your name, and you can use it as like an extra windfall for your own retirement.
Well, Scott, I was thinking too, to Tara's point, you could, let's just, I mean, I think you would have to have other retirement accounts for yourself. Let's say you're a teacher, you have a pension, you have a 403B, you have a 457B, and maybe Roth IRA would be gravy. Maybe that's what you use to save for your kids. So what do you think of this idea, Scott? You do a Roth IRA, you maximize, the contributions if you can, and you give the child, let's say maybe a wedding, you need money for a wedding or some other expense. This could be the non-college part of her question. let's say it grows to $75,000 and you want to help your child with a down payment to a house, grows to 100,000 by the time they're 22, 24. That's what that Roth IRA is for. They take that money. There's no tax consequences, right, Scott? Because it's already after tax. You personally get the benefit of the earnings on that, and you can take that out at retirement. So you've benefited the child, you've saved for them, and you get a little reward yourself because you get the earnings and you take them out when you are eligible to do that at, I think, 59 and a half.
Yes. Now, the only caveat to that is, will there be earnings? When you have a finite date that money is going to come out, so college, I guess, kind of a down payment for a house, even a wedding. If that account is invested aggressively, there is what if that down payment was needed in March of 2020, and you waited till March of 2020 to liquidate? Well, then
Well,
you've got a pretty big problem there, right? So you've got to manage that account in a way that that money's going to be there for that particular event. Otherwise, you could end up in a 2000 or 2007 or a 2020 type event, and that account's worth half, and that's not what you intended it for.
Sure. The only thing I would say is just continue to use the same principles that we talk about saving for retirement.
Yeah.
If your child is just born now and they're not going to be needing that money for 18 years, or they're not going to be looking to buy a house for 30 years, you just have to, whatever that date is, that's where a target date fund would make sense, right? So you would do one that's 18 years out from the child's birth. It would be like a 2040 if they're born now. And that way, it's becoming less risky the closer it gets to the potential date. But I think you're right to say, hey, be careful. It can get whacked by 50% if you're all in equities.
Yeah, the difficulty with target date funds and those is that the target date funds that you can purchase are going to be for retirement, and so people don't take all their money out when they hit the retirement date. They take it out over, well, not generally.
Yeah.
So they're still going to be heavy in equities at the target date, and that's different than target dates that are in 529 plans, which are essentially to be in cash by the time they hit the target date fund.
Good point.
So that'd be one thing. But yeah, no, I think it's a completely legitimate strategy, as long as you do it with intention and you understand how you're doing that. But yeah, I think that's one way to do it. You can also just save in a regular brokerage account in your own name. You won't get any tax deferral. I mean, you'll get tax deferral to the extent that you use efficient exchange traded funds that don't throw off a lot of capital gains. You'll get tax deferral to the extent that you're in a low tax bracket, because capital gains are not taxed. They can be taxed at as low as a 0% federal rate if you're in a low tax bracket. So just a regular brokerage account could work. If you have goals of leaving money to your kids as opposed to giving it to them while you're alive, a taxable brokerage account can actually make a lot of sense, because if you have a very tax efficient vehicle like an exchange traded fund from, say, like a Vanguard, as of right now, this could change with some tax laws. You get a step up in basis when you die. So let's say you put $10,000 into an account in your own name and put it into the Vanguard Total World Stock Market Index, and you let that grow for 30, 40 years, and your plan is to give that to your kid. You're paying taxes on the dividends along the way, but you're not paying any taxes on the capital gains along the way, because most exchange traded funds from Vanguard don't throw off capital gains. It's very cool. And so when you die, let's say it turned into, I don't know, let's just say it turned into $100,000 when you die. You've just left, you started with $10,000 and you just left $100,000 tax free to your kid, not in a Roth, just a regular taxable account, because you got that step up in basis at death. And you've paid a little bit of taxes along the way on the dividends, but that's about it. So that actually, I actually have a couple clients where that's actually what we've set up. They've put money away on a monthly basis because they wanted to control the money. They didn't want their kids to have access to it. Because the other thing that we'll talk about next is opening Roth IRAs for your kids. They didn't want to open the Roth IRA for their kids because they knew their kids would have access to that money.
Mm.
And for their own reasons, they didn't want the kids to have access to that money at this point in time. So this actually worked out better for them.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Yeah, so as far as Roth IRAs for your own kid, I've said it before, both my children have Roth IRAs. They began them when they started getting earned income. Lily started hers like at age 16 or 17. She started with Vanguard. And then when she turned, I think at 18, she could have put it in her own name, but I don't think she did it until she was 21. So like now when I look at my Vanguard account, I only see Ben's. And boy, Ben started right before that boom, you
Oh,
know? So his is like, I want to say he put maybe, well, actually, I take that back. We seeded each of their, no, I think they each started with $1,000. I think Ben's up to like 3,500. I think he's put like another 500 in. I have no idea what Lily's is because I can't tell anymore. And when I ask her, she's like, I don't know. Oh,
okay, that is my favorite answer of the. Okay, that's great. That's hilarious. That's cool though. I mean, if it's invested well, just let it go, and
yeah,
look at it when she's 60. But I'm
yeah,
sure she'll pay more attention to it soon.
yeah. And Scott, you were gonna you want to add anything to Roth IRAs? And I have
I
one more
Oh
comment
yeah,
about 529s before we close.
yeah, sure. No, I love the Roth IRA. I think it's a
Yeah,
fantastic account. My son has a Roth IRA. My daughter is wanting to. She's 13. She's going to get started in doing some work as well. So we're going to start a
nice.
Roth IRA for her. And I just think it's such a great way to build wealth for them early because compounding is the
Yeah.
biggest thing. And so started at if we can start them at 16, putting some money away. Imagine how big of an impact that could have when they're 60 years old.
Oh,
It's huge.
100%. It is such an advantage. The power of time. The last thing I'll say, Scott, and you're the one that helped me with this, is you really want your child's 529 plan when the kid hits 18 to be in the safest possible options. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, because it's short term money now. You're going to be using it within the
Yeah.
next year, 24 months, 36 months, 48 months. You don't want it fluctuating a lot. I mean, unless you've got a whole bunch of extra income that you could supplement. But that's not where most people are. So, I mean, you need that money for this purpose. It shouldn't be invested aggressive. It should not be invested aggressively.
Well, I can only imagine someone who had a child who was turning 18 last year, had maybe not looked at their 529 account, and it was 100% in equities. Potentially it would have dropped 30%, right, Scott, in March 2020. Now we know it rebounded, but what a frightening thing. You basically lost maybe a year of college tuition potentially. Now, again, it did rebound, but it normally doesn't bounce back that fast.
Yeah, and what if that happened in, let's say, well, July,
Yeah.
and you have to make a tuition payment in August?
Yeah.
You've got to liquidate, or you got to get the money from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that's why the target date funds in 529 plans are very different than target date funds in retirement plans.
Yeah. Such a good pointed distinction, Scott, you made there with that.
Yeah, so I don't know if we have thoroughly confused our listeners, but I hope the one thing that they take from this is to do something. It's okay not to know all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
And the key is if you can do something, start it. Get that habit started. That's the hardest thing, and that is a huge accomplishment. And the cool thing is, you can probably have this done in 15 or 20 minutes online.
And
Easy.
again, I always go to this, Scott,
Yeah.
Psychology of Money. I've got these cards, and I love this one. I don't know if you can read that.
Financial success is largely based on behavior. Is so 100% true.
And I'm going to add one more here. Let's see.
I got my own copy right here. My favorite book as well, Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Yeah, I guess we should say that since we're on a podcast. We're showing books.
Who it is. And then look at this, Scott. I'll have you read this.
Warren Buffett, yeah, I love this. Warren Buffett accumulated 99%, the majority of his wealth, after his 65th birthday.
Yeah.
That's an
Why is that,
amazing.
Scott?
It's the power of compounding. The power of compounding. It could take a while, but once you get into those upper tiers, it just takes off. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not even in that conversation with him, but I can tell you personally, when I started saving in my mid 20s, late 20s, it felt like it took forever to get to $5,000, 10,000, and then when I hit 100,000. But now at age 56, especially with all those dividends, Scott reinvested, such an increase in shares, you start to get this exponential growth. Now, of course, like I'll never forget in March 2020 again, I have a spreadsheet and it was like a whack. But again, it came back. And then, of course, thanks to you, I've got more than 50% of my money in very safe TIAA fixed annuity. So when the market does drop, I think, oh, that's good because when I buy at the beginning of the month, I'm getting a little bit of a discount. But I also know that this core part of my portfolio is going up about 3% every year.
Yeah, I wish we had that. I wish we had that interest rate for everybody. And it's crazy that 3% is a good interest rate, but
I know.
it is these days. All right. Well,
Any
I think
last words?
I don't. No, I mean, just the what we've been hammering home the whole time. Do something
Do
first,
something.
and then you can do your research.
Just do it.
But just
That sounds like a good slogan.
you know what?
It
Some
seems like
company should really use that. I
probably
think that would
a
be great.
Pacific Northwest one, dear to your heart. The region should do something like that.
Just do it.
All right. Speaking of just do it, Scott, I'm going to have to go back and figure out how I can edit the video for my screw up with stopping the slides. So I don't know if we'll do slides again. We'll see. But anyway, Scott, again, I know you've got another appointment here. Thank you so much for adding substance to the conversation as always.
Hopefully, I didn't screw it up too bad. Dan Heron is going to be emailing me here, I'm sure, after he listens to this episode.
Well, I think, again, you are the most knowledgeable person I know about personal finance and things like contribution limits for a Roth IRA. It's easy to get these things, confused. There's just so much complexity in this country. I don't think it serves the individual well. I really don't.
Couldn't agree with you more, Dan.
All right, my friend. Talk soon.
All right. See ya.